Dark clouds loomed above Miller's Corner Cafe, as if the sky itself could sense the tension building inside. Sam Miller, the grizzled owner, clutched the counter so tightly his knuckles turned white. His nervous eyes flicked back and forth between the door and the coffee pot. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and Ben Harrison walked in. His smile quickly faded as the once friendly faces in the cafe turned cold. A single, unspoken question seemed to linger in the air. Why today? Why now? As Sam's trembling hands met Ben's expectant gaze, no one in that small, quiet town could have guessed the secrets about to unravel, ones that would tear open the town's deepest scars. Ben Harrison paused at the entrance, wiping his shoes on the rough welcome mat outside Miller's Corner. The crunch of gravel under his feet felt oddly familiar, grounding him for a moment. He looked up at the weathered, hand-painted sign above the door. Miller's Corner Cafe, established 1962, the chipped red letters read. Ben couldn't help but smile faintly. He'd been coming here for years, ever since he moved to this tight-knit community to start his business. The cafe had always been the heart of the town, a place where everyone knew each other and conversations flowed as freely as the coffee. But today, something felt off. Ben pushed open the heavy wooden door, and the familiar jingle of the bell above his head sounded wrong. The lively chatter he was used to seemed to have disappeared, replaced by an unsettling silence. It felt like the whole room had collectively held its breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Ben could feel too many eyes on him, staring too intently. "Morning, everyone," Ben greeted with his usual friendly nod toward the scattered patrons. A few returned the gesture, but most quickly looked away, burying their faces back into half-eaten plates or newspapers they weren't really reading. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. He walked over to the counter, leaning against it with a casual air. "Morning, Sam," he said warmly. Sam Miller, the cafe's owner, stood behind the counter, his posture rigid. Normally, Sam was a friendly, familiar face, weathered but kind, with tired eyes that always had a glint of warmth in them. But today, those eyes were cold, almost hollow. Sam hesitated, his lips pressed into a tight line before he finally spoke. "What can I get you, Ben?" His voice was flat, missing the usual cheer that had greeted Ben for the past decade. "Just the usual," Ben replied, trying to cut through the awkwardness. "A cup of your best coffee, and a slice of that famous apple pie." Sam's hands shook slightly as he wiped the counter with a rag, avoiding Ben's eyes. "We're out of coffee today," he muttered, so quietly Ben almost didn't hear him. Ben frowned, glancing at the fresh pot of coffee steaming just a few feet away. "Out of coffee? Come on, Sam, I can see it right there," he said with a chuckle, trying to lighten the mood. "I said we're out," Sam repeated, his voice louder now, almost snapping. A murmur rippled through the cafe as patrons exchanged puzzled looks, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Ben could feel the weight of their stares pressing down on him, and his easy smile began to fade, replaced by confusion. "All right, no problem," Ben said, keeping his tone calm. "Maybe just the pie, then?" Sam's jaw clenched tight. "No pie either," he said sharply, his hand gripping the edge of the counter so hard his knuckles turned white. "In fact, we're closing early today. You'll have to leave, Ben." Ben blinked in surprise, the words hitting him like a slap. Closing early? At this time? It wasn't even 10 a.m. yet. Closing early? "Sam, what's going on?" he asked, his voice tinged with confusion. Sam's face twisted with frustration, but there was something else there too. Fear. His eyes flicked nervously toward the door, as if expecting someone else to walk in any moment. "I don't have to explain anything to you, Ben," Sam snapped, his voice rising, drawing even more attention from the onlookers. "I said we're closing, and I meant it." Ben stood there, feeling a mix of embarrassment and a simmering anger building inside him. "Did I do something wrong, Sam? Have I offended you?" he asked, his voice steady, though the tightness in his chest betrayed his unease. "I thought we were friends." Sam's face darkened, and he muttered under his breath, "You've done plenty just by walking in here." His voice was shaky now, his tough facade cracking. Before Ben could respond, another voice broke through the thick tension in the room. This isn't right. The voice belonged to Amy, a young journalist who had been quietly watching the entire exchange. Her brow was furrowed in concern as she stood up from her seat. The eyes of the cafe patrons shifted from Ben to Amy, as if waiting for her to say what they were all thinking but were too afraid to voice themselves. She rose from her booth, fists clenched at her sides. "You can't treat him like that, Sam," Amy said, her voice firm yet trembling with emotion. Sam whipped around to face her, his expression boiling with anger. "This is my place, Amy. I run it how I see fit. If you don't like it, you can leave too." For a brief moment, Amy hesitated, caught between standing up for what she knew was right and backing down in the face of Sam's wrath. Her shoulders sagged under the weight of indecision, and after a few tense seconds, she sank back into her seat, her face drained of color, her eyes filled with shame. Seeing her distress, Ben took a deep breath and offered her a reassuring nod. "It's okay, Amy," he said softly, trying to defuse the situation. "I don't want any trouble." He turned toward the door, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on him as he walked away. Their stares were a strange mix of pity, fear, and disdain. His stomach churned with an unsettling feeling he hadn't experienced in years. It was a gnawing sensation of being unwelcome, of being an outsider in a place he had long thought of as home. The door swung shut behind him, and as soon as he stepped out, the quiet murmurs inside the cafe grew louder. Conversations rose into a soft hum of whispers. Some customers quickly fumbled for their wallets, paying their bills and leaving, eager to distance themselves from what they had just witnessed. Others remained glued to their seats, too stunned or too confused to move. The entire diner felt frozen in a strange, uneasy state, where no one spoke up, but everyone had something to say. Behind the counter, Sam stood motionless, breathing heavily. His heart raced in his chest, a swirling storm of emotions crashing inside him, anger, regret, fear, all tangled together in a knot he couldn't unravel. He had made his choice, and there was no going back now. But he couldn't shake the dreadful sense that he had just set something terrible in motion, something beyond his control. Outside, the sun was bright in the sky, but the town felt strangely cold as Ben made his way down the quiet street. His hands were stuffed deep into his pockets, and his mind raced. He tried to steady the storm of thoughts swirling in his head. What had he done wrong? Why had Sam, a man he'd known for years, suddenly turned on him like that? He replayed the whole scene over and over in his mind, searching for an explanation that wasn't there. So lost in thought, Ben didn't notice Sarah, the town councilwoman, standing on the steps of the town hall. "Ben," she called out, her voice full of concern. He stopped in his tracks, looking up to see her approaching. "Oh, hey Sarah," he mumbled, trying to force a smile. "What brings you out here?" "I was just coming back from a meeting," she replied, her eyes scanning his face carefully. "You don't look so good. Is everything all right?" Ben hesitated for a moment, not wanting to burden her, but then sighed deeply. "Not really. Something happened at Miller's Corner," he began, running a hand through his hair. "Sam, he refused to serve me, and I have no idea why." Sarah's brows knitted together in concern. "He refused to serve you? That doesn't sound like Sam at all. Did he say anything? Give any reason?" Ben shook his head in frustration.
"No, nothing."
"He just said they were out of coffee, even though I could see a fresh pot right there. Then he told me they were closing early, and that I needed to leave. It didn't make any sense." "That is strange," Sarah replied, her voice growing thoughtful. "Sam's always been so laid back. Are you sure he didn't give you any reason at all?" "None," Ben said, his frustration mounting. "And it wasn't just business. The way he looked at me, it felt personal, like something else was going on. But I can't figure out what." Sarah frowned, her mind already racing. "I'll look into it, Ben. Don't worry. We'll get to the bottom of this." Ben nodded, grateful for her concern, though the uneasy feeling in his gut refused to leave. "Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate it." As Ben walked away, Sarah turned toward the town hall, her thoughts churning. This wasn't the first time she'd heard whispers about Miller's Corner. There had been rumors for years, subtle hints that not everyone in town was welcome there. But she had always dismissed it as idle gossip, small-town nonsense. Now, she wasn't so sure. Meanwhile, back at Miller's Corner, Sam sat alone in the small, dimly lit office behind the counter. His hands trembled as he clutched a half-empty glass of whiskey, staring blankly at the worn-out ledger in front of him. The numbers on the page blurred and swam before his eyes, meaningless in the wake of what had just happened. His mind kept drifting back to that moment when he had looked into Ben's eyes. And what had he seen there? Disappointment? Betrayal? Fear? A harsh voice echoed in Sam's mind, cutting through the silence like a cold blade. It was his father's voice, stern and unyielding, the way it had always been. You've got to be firm, boy. Don't let anyone push you around, especially them. Sam shuddered, the memory of his father's hard face and cold eyes burning in his mind. His father had been dead for years, but his shadow still loomed large, casting itself over every decision Sam made. He took another sip of whiskey, hoping to calm the nerves rattling inside him. But no amount of alcohol could steady the storm that was now raging in his chest. Sam gripped the glass in his hand, his fingers trembling as he whispered under his breath, "I did what I had to do. I did what was right." But even as the words left his mouth, a flicker of doubt crept into his mind. Was it really right? Or was he just hiding from something he didn't want to confront? Meanwhile, out on Main Street, Amy sat at her cluttered desk in the small office of the local newspaper, typing furiously. After witnessing the strange scene at Miller's Corner, she was determined to get to the bottom of it. Her instincts told her something wasn't right, and she had decided to write about it. She wasn't sure where it would lead, but she knew it was important to bring attention to what she had seen. She titled the piece, "A Question of Fairness at Miller's Corner." Her article wasn't harsh or accusatory, but it raised questions about what had happened and why. She kept it balanced, hoping to spark a conversation rather than point fingers. Once finished, she sent it off to her editor, her heart racing. Within hours, the article was published online, and it quickly spread through the small town. Social media erupted with comments and heated debates. The town was divided. Some defended Sam, saying he had every right to run his business how he saw fit, while others rallied behind Ben, arguing that what happened was unfair and had no justification. The next day, a small group of protesters gathered outside Miller's Corner, holding signs that read, "No to discrimination and fair treatment for all." Inside the cafe, Sam watched them with a grim expression, his jaw set in determination. Outwardly, he appeared unshaken, but inside, he was anything but calm. The pressure was building, and he was struggling to keep it together. Sarah, the councilwoman, decided to pay Sam a visit. She hoped she could get a side of the story and perhaps calm the situation before it spiraled further out of control. Walking into the cafe, the sharp click of her heels echoed on the tiled floor as she approached the counter. Sam stood behind it, wiping glasses with hands that were less steady than usual. "Sam," she began softly, keeping her tone calm and neutral. "Can we talk?" Sam glanced up, his eyes weary and defensive. "What do you want, Sarah?" "I want to understand what happened yesterday," she said. "Why did you refuse to serve Ben?" Sam's face darkened, his expression hardening. "I don't have to explain myself to anyone," he snapped. "This is my place, and I'll run it how I see fit." Sarah raised her hands in a calming gesture. "I understand that, Sam, but people are talking. They're concerned. I'm just here to help you clear things up." Sam's eyes narrowed, suspicion creeping into his gaze. "Clear things up? You think I'm in the wrong, don't you?" Sarah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I didn't say that. I just think it might help if you explained your side of the story. People want to know what's going on." Leaning in closer, Sam's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "There's nothing to explain. I've got my reasons, and they're my business. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got work to do." With that, he turned away, leaving Sarah standing there, a mix of frustration and concern etched on her face. She knew there was more to this than Sam was letting on, but she couldn't force him to talk. She could only hope that whatever was brewing wouldn't tear their small town apart. Outside, The protests grew louder, and Sam's anxiety intensified. He felt trapped, cornered by forces he didn't fully understand. His father's voice echoed in his head once again, colder and more insistent this time. "Stand your ground, boy. Never back down." Sam closed his eyes, taking a deep breath in an attempt to drown out the noise both outside the cafe and in his mind. But deep down, he knew this wasn't over. Something bigger was coming, and he wasn't sure he was ready to face it. Amy's article had ignited a spark in the town of Riverton, and it wasn't long before the flames began to spread. Conversations once whispered in private were now spoken openly, and the town buzzed with tension. What started as a small group of protesters outside Miller's Corner quickly grew as more and more people began to speak out, sharing their own unsettling experiences. Stories began to surface, tales that hinted at a troubling pattern within the town, one that had been overlooked for far too long. For Amy, this was only the beginning. The more she dug, the more she realized how deep the roots of this issue went. She spent her nights combing through old town records and speaking with anyone who might have a story to tell. The deeper she went, the more she uncovered about the town's past and how much had been swept under the rug. One evening, Amy made her way to the local library, determined to uncover more. She pulled out a dusty stack of old newspaper archives from the 1960s and began sifting through them. It didn't take long before she stumbled upon stories about the original Miller's Corner Cafe, back when it was run by Sam's father, James Miller. The articles painted a picture of a man who was respected by some and feared by others. There were whispers even then, rumors of exclusion and secret dealings, but nothing had ever been brought to light. The town had moved on, and those stories had been buried. Now, with everything happening at the cafe, it seemed like the past was beginning to resurface. And Amy was determined to shine a light on it. The town of Riverton was in shock. People who had known Sam all their lives started seeing him differently. Some felt sympathy, while others were even more confused by the unfolding drama. At Miller's Corner, the protests only grew louder, with more people joining each day. From behind the counter, Sam watched, feeling as if the walls were slowly closing in around him. He knew he couldn't escape his past forever. Sooner or later, he would have to face the truth and deal with the consequences of his actions. But as he looked out the window at the angry faces and the waving signs, a deep fear settled in his chest. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what was coming. In fact, he wasn't sure if he'd ever be ready. Then, one afternoon, when the tension in town seemed on the verge of boiling over, a new face appeared at the door of Miller's Corner. A face that would change everything. The days had grown shorter, and a chill had set in the air, but the heated protests outside Miller's Corner showed no sign of cooling down. Every day, a group of protesters gathered outside, their chants echoing through the streets. Business inside the cafe was dwindling. Sam Miller tried to act as if everything was normal, but he could feel the isolation creeping in. Even his most loyal customers were beginning to avoid the cafe, too afraid to be seen as supporting him. The town's mood had shifted from quiet curiosity to something more hostile, more confrontational. Then, on a crisp morning, a stranger arrived in Riverton. Well, perhaps not a complete stranger. Some of the older residents remembered Ida Williams from decades ago. She had been a young woman back then, full of energy and promise. Now, she was an elderly woman, her presence quiet but commanding. She wore a long coat, and a hat shaded her piercing eyes. There was a calm dignity in the way she moved, each step deliberate as if she had a purpose, yet she said nothing to anyone as she walked through the town. Ida headed straight for Miller's Corner. When she pushed open the door, the familiar jingle of the bell above echoed through the cafe, cutting through the tense atmosphere like a knife. The few patrons inside turned to look at her, recognizing her immediately, before quickly turning away, whispering amongst themselves. Sam had been wiping down the counter when he saw her. His movements stopped abruptly, his eyes widening in disbelief. His hand tightened around the cloth he had been holding. He hadn't seen Ida in over 40 years, not since that fateful day when everything had changed. He had hoped he would never see her again. Yet here she was, standing in front of him like a ghost from the past. Ida approached the counter with a calm, almost unreadable smile. "Morning, Sam," she said, her voice steady. Sam swallowed hard, struggling to keep his composure. "Ida, what are you doing here?" His voice came out strained. "I've come back," she replied simply, "to see old friends and visit old places." Sam's face flushed as he looked around nervously. "Now's not a good time, Ida," he muttered, his voice barely holding together. "There's a lot going on." Ida nodded, her gaze never wavering from his. "I can see that. But I think it's the perfect time, don't you?" The tension in the room thickened. It was as if everyone in the cafe was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Sam shifted uncomfortably, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "Look, Ida," he started, his voice shaking slightly. "If you're here to stir things up?" She cut him off with a soft laugh. "Oh, Sam. I'm not here to stir things up. I'm here to calm things down. You've got yourself into quite a mess, haven't you?" Sam's face flushed red with anger. "You think this is funny? You think any of this is a joke?" Ida's expression softened, her tone gentle. "No, Sam, I don't. I think it's sad. I think it's tragic that, after all these years, you're still living under your father's shadow." Sam flinched, as if he had been physically struck. "Don't talk about my father," he whispered fiercely. "You don't know what it was like." "I know more than you think," Ida replied softly. "And I know that whatever he did to you, you have to stop letting it control your life. You need to stop hiding behind his mistakes and start making amends for your own." Sam's eyes darted around the room, catching the curious stares and judgmental looks of his customers. He felt cornered, exposed. "You need to leave, Ida," he said finally, his voice low and strained. "Please. Just go." Ida studied him for a moment, her gaze unwavering. Then she nodded slowly. "I'll go, Sam," she said quietly. "But this isn't over. You and we have unfinished business. And I'll be back to see you again. You can count on that." With that, she turned and walked out, the bell above the door ringing as she left. The silence in the cafe was deafening. Sam stood there, trembling slightly, unsure of what to do or say. He had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. In the days that followed, Ida returned to the cafe every morning, always ordering the same thing, a simple cup of coffee. She would sit quietly at a table by the window, watching the world go by, as if waiting for something. Sam tried to ignore her presence, but he couldn't shake the feeling that her arrival had stirred something deep inside him, something he had buried long ago. Each day, more people began talking about Ida's return. Whispers spread throughout town, and her presence seemed to fuel the growing tensions. Riverton was no longer the quiet town it had once been. Something was shifting, and Sam knew that sooner or later, he would have to confront the truth, not just about Ida, but about himself and the choices he had made. Sam's hands clenched tighter around the rag, his thoughts racing. He felt as if Ida's presence was suffocating him, even though she never said a word to him. Every day, she sat by the window, quietly sipping her coffee, and Sam couldn't help but feel that she was waiting for him to make a move, to acknowledge the truth buried deep in their shared past. Meanwhile, Amy's investigation continued to pick up steam. She followed every lead, speaking with more townspeople, and she started to uncover something unsettling. Ida's sudden return had triggered a wave of stories that had long been kept under wraps. Some of the older residents began to admit that Miller's Corner had always felt like a place of exclusion, a cafe where certain people weren't welcome. The deeper Amy dug, the bigger the story became. This was no longer just a personal spat between Sam and Ben. This was turning into something that revealed cracks in the town's very foundation. Feeling a strong urge to get to the bottom of it, Amy decided to confront Ida directly. She wanted to know why Ida had come back after all these years, and what she hoped to achieve. Amy found Ida sitting at her usual table in the cafe, her hands cradling a cup of steaming coffee. "Ida," Amy began as she approached cautiously, "I'd like to talk to you if you have a moment." Ida looked up, her warm smile greeting Amy. "Of course, dear. Sit down," she replied, gesturing to the chair across from her. Amy took a seat, her curiosity bubbling over. Everyone is wondering, why did you come back to Riverton after all these years? What are you hoping to achieve? Ida took a thoughtful sip of her coffee before carefully placing the cup back down on the saucer. I came back because there's unfinished business here, she said slowly. There are truths that need to be faced and wounds that need healing. Amy leaned in closer, her journalistic instincts kicking in. But why now? Why after so much time has passed? Ida's eyes softened, and a faint sadness seemed to wash over her. Because, Amy, sometimes the past doesn't stay in the past. Sometimes it comes back to haunt you. And sometimes you have to go back to where it all started to make things right. A shiver ran down Amy's spine. What do you mean by that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ida's gaze drifted toward the window, distant and reflective. There's something Sam isn't telling you. Something he's kept hidden for a long time. It's time for that secret to come out, but he has to be the one to say it. He has to be the one to face it. Amy's pulse quickened. Do you know what it is? Ida nodded slowly, her eyes full of knowing. I know, she said, but I can't tell you, not yet. You'll have to wait, just like I have. Amy left the cafe more confused than ever, but her curiosity had been piqued. She had a feeling that whatever Sam was hiding, it was something that could shake the very fabric of Riverton. The next morning, a new figure arrived in town, a man in his mid-40s, tall, with an air of authority about him. He was sharply dressed in a tailored suit, clearly out of place in the small, quiet town. His presence commanded attention as he strode through the streets, eventually making his way to Miller's Corner. Inside the cafe, Sam was tidying up when the man walked in. His eyes swept the room before locking onto Sam. Are you Sam Miller? The man asked, his voice calm but firm. Sam looked up, startled by the directness. Yes, I am. Who's asking? The man extended his hand. My name is Marcus Williams. I'm Ida's son. Sam's face turned pale. He hadn't known that Ida had a son, let alone one who had come looking for him. I didn't know, Sam stammered. What do you want? Marcus smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was cold, calculated. I want to talk to you about my mother, he said. About what happened between the two of you. I want to understand why she felt the need to come back here after all these years. Sam swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. That's a long story. Marcus's smile faded, and his tone turned steely. Then I suggest you start talking. Because if you don't, I will. The cafe fell silent. The few patrons inside darted glances between Marcus and Sam, sensing the gravity of what was about to unfold. Sam took a deep breath, knowing he couldn't avoid this any longer. All right, he said quietly. Let's talk. He led Marcus to a quiet corner table, away from the prying eyes of the cafe's other customers. Sam felt like a man on trial, and in many ways he was. He could feel Marcus's piercing gaze on him, sharp and unforgiving, and he knew this conversation was going to be anything but easy. Why don't you start from the beginning? Marcus said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Sam nodded slowly, his hands trembling as he clasped them together on the table. Your mother and I, we were friends. Good friends. We met when we were young. She worked at a store down the street, and I'd see her every day when I passed by. We started talking and, I don't know, we just clicked. We had the same sense of humor, the same interests. We became close. Marcus nodded, his face expressionless, urging Sam to continue. Sam sighed deeply, the weight of years pressing down on him. And then things got complicated. Complicated how? Marcus asked, his voice still calm but laced with intensity. Sam looked down at his hands, unable to meet Marcus's eyes. My father, he didn't approve of our friendship. He said things. Things I'm not proud of. He made me do things I'm not proud of. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. What did he make you do? Sam's voice trembled. He made me push her away. He made me choose. And I chose wrong. Marcus's expression remained hard, but a flicker of understanding passed through his eyes. And now she's back. To settle the score, I suppose? Sam nodded, tears welling in his eyes. I don't know how to make it right. I don't know if I can. Marcus leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. You're going to have to try, Sam. Because my mother didn't come back for nothing. Sam's father found out about his friendship with Ida and was furious. He was a hard man, Sam said, his voice shaking slightly. He was stuck in his ways. He thought our friendship was inappropriate. Sam's face was tight with the memory, his hands fidgeting on the table. He told me to stop seeing her, to break it off, and I did what he said. I was young, scared. I didn't want to lose my father's approval. Marcus leaned in closer, his eyes sharp with disbelief. And you just walked away? Just like that? Sam shook his head, struggling to explain. It wasn't that simple. My father, he was angry. He threatened to ruin her, to spread lies about her. He had power in this town. People listened to him, feared him. I thought I was protecting her by staying away. Marcus's jaw clenched. Protecting her by abandoning her, he said, his voice dripping with accusation. Sam flinched at the harsh words, but didn't argue. I know it sounds like an excuse, he said quietly. But it was a different time. Things were different back then. I thought I was doing the right thing. Marcus leaned back, his expression cold and unreadable. And you never spoke to her again? Sam's face twisted with regret. I tried once. I went to her house, but she was already gone. Left town without a word. I didn't know where she had gone, and I didn't have the courage to ask. I let it be. And I've regretted it ever since. There was a long pause. Marcus studied Sam, his gaze hard but thoughtful. And that's why you turned Ben away, isn't it? Marcus asked finally. Because he reminded you of her? Of your past? Of everything you didn't have the courage to face? Sam's eyes widened in shock. I don't know. Maybe you're right. I saw him, and it all came rushing back. The guilt, the shame, the fear. I didn't know what to do, so I reacted badly. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did to him and to your mother. Marcus nodded slowly, as if weighing Sam's words. You know, Sam, he said, his voice calmer now. My mother didn't come back here for revenge. She came back to give you a chance to make things right. Sam looked up, surprised. A chance? Yes, Marcus continued. She believes in forgiveness and second chances. She wants you to face the past to make amends. That's why she's been coming here every day. She's been waiting for you to speak up, to take responsibility. Sam felt a lump forming in his throat, his emotions overwhelming him. I don't know if I can, he admitted. I don't know if I have the strength. Marcus's expression softened. Just a little. You have to try, Sam. For her, for yourself, for this town. It's time to end this cycle of silence and shame. It's time to speak the truth. The weight of Marcus's words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Sam nodded slowly, a single tear sliding down his cheek. I'll try, he whispered. I'll try. Later that afternoon, Sam stood outside Miller's corner, looking out at the crowd that had gathered. His heart pounded in his chest, and his palms were sweaty. He had never been more afraid, but he knew this moment had been coming for a long time. He had to face it. He stepped forward, his legs feeling like they could give out at any moment, and took a deep breath. Folks, he called out, his voice trembling. I've made mistakes. Big mistakes. I've let fear and guilt control me for too long. I've hurt people, good people, and I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. He paused, his eyes searching the crowd for Ida. When he found her, she was standing at the back, her expression calm and unreadable. There's something you all need to know, Sam continued, his voice cracking slightly. Something I've kept hidden for too long. I'm not proud of what I did, or what I allowed to happen. But I'm ready to make it right if you'll let me. Ida began to move through the crowd, walking slowly but purposefully until she stood directly in front of Sam. She looked up into his eyes, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. Finally, she spoke. I forgive you, Sam, she said softly, her voice steady. But forgiveness is just the first step. Now you have to prove it. Sam nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I will, Ida. I promise I'll prove it." The crowd watched in stunned silence. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. At first, it was just one person, tentative and unsure, but the sound spread quickly. More and more people joined in, and soon the applause grew louder, stronger, more insistent. Sam stood there, tears still flowing, as the sound of clapping filled the air around him. It wasn't the end of his journey, but it was a beginning, a chance to make things right. And for the first time in years, Sam felt hope. Owner of Miller's Corner, you may be held accountable for these actions. Sam's heart sank. He stared at the pile of documents now sitting on the counter in front of him. His mind raced, trying to process what William Grant was telling him. His father had always kept his business dealings to himself, but Sam had never imagined anything like this. Laundering money? That can't be right, Sam said, his voice barely above a whisper. Grant remained calm and collected, his voice steady. "I'm afraid the documents are quite clear, Mr. Miller. Your father was involved in significant illegal activity, and the cafe was used as a cover for those operations. While you may not have been directly involved, as the heir to the estate and the current owner of this business, the legal implications now fall on you." The room seemed to close in around Sam. All the progress he had made, all the small steps toward redemption he had taken, were they about to be undone by the sins of his father? "I didn't know," Sam muttered, shaking his head as if to clear it. "I had nothing to do with any of that. I was just running the cafe. I had no idea this was happening." Grant nodded, his expression still unreadable. "That may be true, but the law is the law. The documents are being reviewed, and it's possible that legal action will be taken. I'm here to offer my services to help you navigate this situation, but you need to understand that this could get very complicated." Sam swallowed hard, his mouth dry. The weight of his father's legacy had always loomed over him, but he had never expected it to come crashing down like this. "What happens now?" Sam asked, his voice hoarse. Grant leaned back slightly, his hands resting on the briefcase. "The first step will be to review all of the documents thoroughly. There may be options for mitigating the consequences, but we'll need to cooperate fully with the authorities. If we act quickly, we might be able to resolve this without too much damage to your reputation or to the business." Sam felt as though the ground had been pulled out from under him. The cafe, the business his family had built, it was all in jeopardy now, not because of anything he had done, but because of choices his father had made long ago. At that moment, the door to the cafe swung open, and Ida stepped inside. She had arrived for her daily coffee, as she had for weeks now, silently observing Sam's efforts to make amends. But today, as she walked in and saw the stranger with the briefcase and the look of despair on Sam's face, she sensed something was different. Ida approached the counter, her eyes shifting between Sam and the attorney. "Is everything all right, Sam?" she asked, her voice filled with quiet concern. Sam looked at her, his face pale, unsure of what to say. I don't know. This is William Grant. He's an attorney. He says my father was involved in illegal activities, money laundering, using the cafe as a front. And now I might be held responsible." Ida's eyes widened, her expression softening with empathy. "Oh, Sam," she said gently. "I'm so sorry." Grant, sensing the tension, cleared his throat. "I understand this is difficult, but I assure you, we'll do everything we can to resolve this in the best possible way." Ida placed a hand on Sam's shoulder, offering a small but steadying gesture of support. "You've come this far, Sam," she said. "You've started making amends for the past. This is just another part of it, another truth you have to face. But you're not alone in this." Sam looked at her, his eyes brimming with emotion. "I don't know how I'm supposed to fix this," he said, his voice cracking. "You don't have to fix it all at once," Ida replied. "Just take it one step at a time like you've been doing. And we'll all be here to help you." Grant, still holding the documents, nodded. "She's right, Mr. Miller. It won't be easy, but it's not impossible. The sooner we act, the better the chances of getting through this." For a long moment, Sam stood in silence, staring at the papers on the counter, the weight of his father's mistakes pressing down on him. But then slowly he nodded. Okay, Sam said quietly, his voice filled with a mix of determination and fear. Let's do this. Whatever needs to be done, I'll do it. Ida smiled softly, her hand still resting on Sam's shoulder. That's the first step, Sam. You've already shown the town that you're ready to change. Now it's time to show yourself that you can face whatever comes next. The walls that had surrounded Sam for so long were beginning to fall, piece by piece. He had started by facing his own guilt and shame, and now he was being forced to confront the darker truths of his family's past. But he wasn't alone, and for the first time, he believed he might actually have the strength to make things right. As Grant gathered the documents and prepared to leave, Sam looked out the window of the cafe. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over Riverton. There was still a long road ahead, full of challenges and uncertainty, but for the first time in a long time, Sam felt hope. Ida gave Sam's hand a gentle squeeze before stepping back. We'll face this together, she said softly. Sam nodded, wiping a tear from his cheek. Together, he repeated, his voice filled with a quiet resolve. Better something good. But maybe the way forward isn't just about holding on to the past. It's about transforming it. You don't have to sell the cafe if you don't want to, but maybe it's time to reshape it, give it a new purpose. Sam frowned, unsure of what she meant. A new purpose?
How?
What could I possibly do that would fix this? Ida sat down across from him, her eyes calm but filled with determination. You could turn Miller's Corner into something more than just a cafe. Make it a community hub, a place where people can come together to heal, to support each other. Use the cafe's history as a way to educate others, to show them how we can learn from the mistakes of the past. Sam thought about her words, letting them sink in. Could he really transform the cafe into something that stood for more than just his family's mistakes? Could he take the darkest parts of its history and create something meaningful out of them? Ida continued. You've been making amends, Sam, and people have seen that. But this cafe, it's still tied to your father's legacy, to the secrets he kept. Maybe it's time to change the story, to make this place stand for something new, something positive. Sam looked around at the cafe, imagining what it could become. He had spent so much of his life trying to fix what his father had broken, but maybe Ida was right. Maybe this was his chance to do more than just fix it. Maybe he could completely redefine it. And how would I do that? Sam asked, still skeptical but intrigued by the idea. You could start by being transparent with the town, Ida suggested. Hold a public meeting, share the truth about your father's actions, and explain what you're doing to make sure history doesn't repeat itself. Then you could partner with local organizations, turn the cafe into a space where people can gather, learn, and support each other. You could offer workshops, talks, and community events. It doesn't have to be just a place for food and coffee. It could be a place for growth and change. Sam felt a spark of hope ignite inside him. For the first time in days, he saw a path forward that didn't involve selling everything he had worked for. He had been afraid of facing the truth, but perhaps facing it head-on was exactly what needed to happen. It's a big step, Sam said, his voice cautious. And it won't be easy. No, Ida agreed. It won't. But you've already taken the hardest step, acknowledging the truth. Now, it's about what you do next. And I believe you're ready. Sam sat in silence for a long moment, thinking about everything Ida had said. He wasn't sure if he had the strength to do it, but he knew he couldn't run from his past any longer. His father's mistakes had haunted him for too long, and if he didn't confront them now, they would continue to define him. The next morning, Sam woke with a sense of clarity. He knew what he had to do. He gathered his thoughts, made a few phone calls, and by the end of the day, he had organized a town meeting at Miller's Corner. He would stand before the people of Riverton and tell them the full truth about his father, about the cafe, and about his plans to turn it into something positive for the community. As the meeting approached, Sam felt his nerves creeping in, but Ida's steady presence kept him grounded. When the time came, the cafe was packed with townspeople, their faces a mixture of curiosity and concern. Sam stood in front of them, his heart pounding, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid. Thank you all for coming, Sam began, his voice shaking at first, but growing stronger with each word. There's something you all need to know about Miller's Corner, about my father, and about what I've learned since taking over this cafe." He spoke openly about the documents, the illegal activities his father had been involved in, and the consequences that now loomed over him. He told them about his journey to make amends, how he had tried to right the wrongs of the past, but that more needed to be done. "And now," Sam said, his voice filled with resolve, "I want to turn this cafe into something more than just a business. I want it to be a place where this community can come together, where we can learn from our past and grow together. I'm going to partner with local organizations and open the doors to everyone. This will be a place of healing, of learning, and of progress." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Then, one by one, people began to clap. Slowly at first, but soon the applause grew louder, echoing through the cafe. Sam looked out at the crowd, seeing faces he had known for years, some filled with support, others with uncertainty. But for the first time, he felt like he was doing the right thing, not just for himself, but for the entire town. Edith stood in the back, her smile soft but full of pride. She had known this was the right path, and now Sam knew it too. As the meeting ended and people began to leave, Sam felt a sense of relief wash over him. He had a long road ahead, but for the first time in years, it felt like a road he could walk with his head held high. The cafe might still bear his family's name, but now it would stand for something new, something better. And Sam Miller was ready to face whatever came next. Place for everyone. The transformation was complete, not just of the cafe, but of Sam's life and the town itself. Miller's Corner had evolved from a symbol of division and secrecy into a beacon of hope, unity, and community. It had become a place where everyone, regardless of their past, could find a sense of belonging. As the evening unfolded, the cafe buzzed with energy. People moved in and out, laughing, chatting, and sharing stories. The atmosphere was one of joy and togetherness, a stark contrast to the tension and conflict that had gripped the town just weeks earlier. Sam stood by the entrance, watching the faces of the people he had grown up with, people who had once been divided but were now united under a shared vision. It was a sight that filled him with a quiet, humble pride. He knew that while the cafe had been his father's legacy, it was now his to shape, and he had turned it into something that truly mattered. Ida, standing by his side, placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've done it, Sam," she said softly, her eyes filled with warmth. "You've turned this place into something beautiful." Sam smiled, feeling the weight of the past finally lift from his shoulders. "We did it," he replied, glancing around at the room filled with friends, family, and townspeople. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, or the community." As the night wore on, Sam made his way to the small stage they had set up in the corner. He tapped the microphone to get everyone's attention. The room quieted, and all eyes turned toward him. "I just want to thank you all for being here tonight," Sam began, his voice strong and steady. "This place, Miller's Corner, is more than just a cafe now. It's a place where we come together, where we support each other, and where we make sure everyone feels like they belong. I'm so grateful for the second chance you all have given me, and I promise that this is just the beginning." The crowd erupted in applause, and Sam felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the heat of the packed room. It was the warmth of acceptance, of knowing that he had earned the trust of his community and had built something that could truly make a difference. As the applause died down, Ida took the stage next to Sam. "And now," she said, her voice clear and bright, "I think it's time to raise a toast. To Miller's Corner, and to all of you who have made this place what it is today, a place for everyone." Glasses clinked, cheers rose up, and the cafe once again filled with the joyful noise of celebration. Sam looked out at the sea of faces, his heart full. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led him here, to this moment. He had faced the mistakes of his past, confronted his father's legacy, and found a way to build something positive out of the ashes. And now, standing in the cafe that had once been a source of shame, Sam saw it for what it truly was, a place of redemption, community, and hope. As the night drew to a close and the last of the guests began to leave, Sam stood at the door, shaking hands and thanking everyone who had come. Ben gave him a firm handshake and a smile. "You've done good, Sam. Really good." "Thanks, Ben," Sam replied, his voice thick with emotion. "That means a lot." As Ben left, Marcus approached, his face serious but kind. "I wasn't sure what to expect when I came back here," Marcus admitted, "but I'm glad to see what you've done with the place. My mother would be proud." Sam nodded, deeply touched by Marcus's words. "Thank you, Marcus. That means more than you know." Marcus gave him a nod of respect before turning to leave, and Sam watched him go, knowing that while some wounds take time to heal, the process had truly begun. The cafe began to quiet down, and soon, only Sam and Ida were left. They stood together at the entrance, looking out into the peaceful night. "This is just the beginning," Ida said softly, echoing the words she had spoken earlier. Sam nodded, feeling the truth of it. "Yeah," he replied, "just the beginning." As they stood there in the twilight, the neon sign above them glowing warmly in the cool evening air, Sam felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a deep sense of peace. For the first time, he wasn't running from the past. He was walking toward the future, and it was full of possibilities. Miller's Corner was no longer just a cafe. It was a symbol of change, of community, and of the power of second chances. And Sam Miller was ready for whatever came next. Place for everyone. The transformation was complete, not just of the cafe, but of Sam's life and the town itself. Miller's Corner had evolved from a symbol of division and secrecy into a beacon of hope, unity, and community. It had become a place where everyone, regardless of their past, could find a sense of belonging. As the evening unfolded, the cafe buzzed with energy. People moved in and out, laughing, chatting, and sharing stories. The atmosphere was one of joy and togetherness, a stark contrast to the tension and conflict that had gripped the town just weeks earlier. Sam stood by the entrance, watching the faces of the people he had grown up with, people who had once been divided but were now united under a shared vision. It was a sight that filled him with a quiet, humble pride. He knew that while the cafe had been his father's legacy, it was now his to shape, and he had turned it into something that truly mattered. Ida, standing by his side, placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've done it, Sam," she said softly, her eyes filled with warmth. "You've turned this place into something beautiful." Sam smiled, feeling the weight of the past finally lift from his shoulders. "We did it," he replied, glancing around at the room filled with friends, family, and townspeople. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, or the community." As the night wore on, Sam made his way to the small stage they had set up in the corner. He tapped the microphone to get everyone's attention. The room quieted, and all eyes turned toward him. "I just want to thank you all for being here tonight," Sam began, his voice strong and steady. "This place, Miller's Corner, is more than just a cafe now. It's a place where we come together, where we support each other, and where we make sure everyone feels like they belong. I'm so grateful for the second chance you all have given me, and I promise that this is just the beginning." The crowd erupted in applause, and Sam felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the heat of the packed room. It was the warmth of acceptance, of knowing that he had earned the trust of his community and had built something that could truly make a difference. As the applause died down, Ida took the stage next to Sam. "And now," she said, her voice clear and bright, "I think it's time to raise a toast. To Miller's Corner, and to all of you who have made this place what it is today, a place for everyone." Glasses clinked, cheers rose up, and the cafe once again filled with the joyful noise of celebration. Sam looked out at the sea of faces, his heart full. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led him here, to this moment. He had faced the mistakes of his past, confronted his father's legacy, and found a way to build something positive out of the ashes. And now, standing in the cafe that had once been a source of shame, Sam saw it for what it truly was, a place of redemption, community, and hope. As the night drew to a close and the last of the guests began to leave, Sam stood at the door, shaking hands and thanking everyone who had come. Ben gave him a firm handshake and a smile. "You've done good, Sam. Really good." "Thanks, Ben," Sam replied, his voice thick with emotion. That means a lot. As Ben left, Marcus approached, his face serious but kind. I wasn't sure what to expect when I came back here, Marcus admitted, but I'm glad to see what you've done with the place. My mother would be proud. Sam nodded, deeply touched by Marcus's words. Thank you, Marcus. That means more than you know. Marcus gave him a nod of respect before turning to leave, and Sam watched him go, knowing that while some wounds take time to heal, the process had truly begun. The cafe began to quiet down, and soon, only Sam and Ida were left. They stood together at the entrance, looking out into the peaceful night. This is just the beginning, Ida said softly, echoing the words she had spoken earlier. Sam nodded, feeling the truth of it. Yeah, he replied. Just the beginning. As they stood there in the twilight, the neon sign above them glowing warmly in the cool evening air, Sam felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a deep sense of peace. For the first time, he wasn't running from the past. He was walking toward the future, and it was full of possibilities. Miller's Corner was no longer just a cafe. It was a symbol of change, of community, and of the power of second chances. And Sam Miller was ready for whatever came next. A place to belong. With those final words, a new chapter began at Miller's Corner, a chapter brimming with hope, redemption, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. For Sam, for Ida, and for the town of Riverton, the road ahead was still long and uncertain, but the weight of the past had finally begun to lift. They had taken the first steps toward healing, both as individuals and as a community. As they stood together in the warm glow of the evening, the quiet hum of the town settling into the night, they knew deep down that they were ready to face whatever challenges might come. The cafe, once a symbol of division and secrets, was now a place of unity, where everyone was welcome and where the future felt full of possibility. For Sam, the transformation of Miller's Corner was more than just a business decision. It was the culmination of years of struggle and regret, a chance to finally put the mistakes of his father to rest. For Ida, it was a fulfillment of a promise, the realization of something she had long hoped for, but never thought she would see. And for the people of Riverton, it was a reminder that no matter how deep the scars, there was always room for forgiveness, growth, and second chances. Together, they had created more than just a cafe. They had found something they had all been searching for, something more important than any building or business, a place to belong. And with that, the story of Miller's Corner was no longer one of pain and secrecy, but of hope, community, and the endless potential for change.